Before we begin tonight's terrifying true story, I want you to think about the last time you were alone in a familiar place at night. Maybe it was walking to your car after work, or being alone in your house when everyone else was asleep. That feeling of safety can change in an instant when something doesn't feel right. Tonight's story comes from someone who experienced exactly that, an ordinary situation that turned into a nightmare. As I tell you this story, remember that this really happened to a real person, and it could happen to anyone. The most frightening experiences often occur in the places we feel safest. I never thought I'd be afraid of my grandmother's house. Growing up, it was my favorite place in the world. Every summer, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, we'd make the drive from Columbus to that little two-story in suburban Dayton, Ohio. The house smelled like vanilla candles and old books. My grandmother would bake cookies, and we'd watch her favorite shows on that. Old television in the basement den. It was comfort, it was home, it was safe, but she passed away 2 years ago, and the house had been sitting empty ever since. My parents couldn't bear to go through her things, and honestly, neither could I. We just locked the door and left everything exactly as it was. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. The house became a time capsule of her life, slowly gathering dust while we avoided the emotional weight of dealing with it all. Finally, last October, my parents asked if I could spend a weekend there to start sorting through things. They wanted to sell, but someone needed to go through decades of accumulated belongings first. I volunteered, thinking it would be therapeutic, a chance to say goodbye to Grandma and to the house I loved. I took Friday off work, threw some clothes in a bag, and made the 90-minute drive from Columbus. I arrived around 6 in the evening. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the front yard. The grass had grown wild, nearly knee-high. The realtor my parents hired had been maintaining the exterior just enough to keep the city from complaining, but barely. As I walked up the cracked concrete driveway, I noticed the paint peeling on the front door. The whole place looked tired, abandoned, nothing like the vibrant home I remembered from childhood. The key stuck in the lock, like it always had. I remembered that little quirk, having to jiggle it just right. When the door finally opened, I was hit with that smell. Not the vanilla candles I remembered, but something else. Stale air, dust, and something underneath I couldn't quite identify, something organic and unpleasant that made my stomach turn slightly. I flicked the light switch, and thankfully my parents had kept the utilities running. The overhead fixture buzzed to life, casting yellow light over the entryway. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Isn't that always how it is when you return to childhood places? The living room that once seemed vast was actually quite cramped. My grandmother's furniture was still there, the floral couch, the oak coffee table, the recliner she'd spent her last years sitting in. My parents had covered everything with white sheets to protect from dust, and in the dim evening light, they looked like ghosts of furniture, shapeless forms that were familiar, but wrong. I dropped my bag by the door and walked through the first floor, turning on lights as I went. The kitchen was exactly as I remembered, yellow wallpaper with tiny flowers, the same ancient refrigerator humming in the corner, the round dining table where we'd eaten countless meals. I opened the fridge out of curiosity. It was empty and unplugged, door propped open with a towel to prevent mold. Someone, probably my mother, had cleaned it out before they locked up the house. I spent the next couple of hours going through the main floor, taking inventory of what was there. My parents wanted me to make piles, keep, donate, trash, but I found myself unable to throw anything away. Every item held a memory: her favorite coffee mug with the chipped handle, the Afghan she'd crocheted during my senior year of high school, the collection of ceramic birds she'd displayed on the mantel. How do you decide what deserves to continue existing and what gets thrown in a dumpster? By 9 o'clock, I was exhausted, more emotionally than physically. I hadn't brought any food, figuring I'd order delivery, but when I checked my phone, I realized how far from civilization I actually was. The nearest restaurant that delivered was 12 miles away and closed at 9. I'd have to make do with the granola bars in my bag. I decided to call it a night early. I'd brought an air mattress and sleeping bag, planning to camp out in my old bedroom upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, they creaked in that specific pattern I remembered from sneaking down to watch TV after bedtime as a kid. 3rd step, 7th step, 11th step, the creaking trinity that always threatened to give me away. The sound was comforting and eerie at the same time, a reminder of innocence in this house that now felt so different. My old bedroom was the smallest room upstairs, just barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. My grandmother had converted it into a sewing room after I grew up and stopped visiting as often. Her sewing machine sat in the corner, covered with its own white sheet. I inflated the air mattress and laid out my sleeping bag, trying not to think about how strange it felt to sleep in this house alone for the first time in my life. I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom when I heard it. A sound from downstairs. Distinct, unmistakable, impossible, the television turning on. Not just the sound of a TV running, but that specific click and hum of an old CRT television coming to life, followed immediately by the tinny audio of old programming. I froze with my toothbrush in my mouth, toothpaste foam dripping into the sink. The sound was coming from the basement, from my grandmother's old television in the den. My rational mind immediately started making excuses. Old electronics can malfunction. Maybe there was a power surge. Maybe the TV had been left on some kind of timer 2 years ago and the internal battery finally died and reset it. Maybe. But my rational mind wasn't in control of my body. My hands started shaking. That primitive part of my brain that's kept humans alive for millennia was screaming that something was wrong. I rinsed my mouth and walked slowly to the top of the basement stairs. The door was closed. I remembered closing it when I first arrived, some instinct not wanting to look into that dark void. Now I could see light underneath it, that characteristic blue-white glow of a television screen, flickering with whatever was playing. I could hear it clearly now. Voices. Laughter. The audio quality was poor, fuzzy, like old recordings. I recognized the sound. It was exactly how my grandmother's TV always sounded. She'd refused to upgrade, insisted the old Zenith worked just fine. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, hand hovering over the doorknob, trying to convince myself to open it. Every horror movie I'd ever seen was playing in my head. Don't go into the basement. Nothing good happens in basements. But this was my grandmother's house. This was the basement where I'd spent hundreds of hours as a kid, watching cartoons and game shows with her. There was nothing scary about it. There couldn't be. I opened the door. The television glow immediately washed up the wooden stairs, brighter than I expected, almost aggressive in its intensity. The audio was louder now, too. I could make out what was playing. Some kind of variety show, the kind my grandmother used to watch. The sound of a studio audience laughing at jokes I couldn't quite hear. I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was cold, much colder than the rest of the house. I could see my breath fogging in the air, which made no sense. It was October in Ohio, cool, but not cold enough for that. The television sat in the corner of the den exactly where it had always been, glowing bright in the otherwise pitch-black basement. I hadn't turned on any lights, and I wasn't sure why. Some instinct kept me from illuminating the entire space. TV was showing exactly what I'd guessed. A variety show from the 1960s, black and white, the host in a suit telling jokes to an enthusiastic crowd. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. This show wasn't just old. It was impossibly old. The production quality, the fashion, the style of humor. This was from before cable TV, before syndication, before the internet. This was the kind of content that only existed in archives now. There was no way this was broadcasting on any channel. I walked closer to the television, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's when I noticed the VCR underneath the TV was on, its little green light glowing steadily. A tape was inside, playing. Someone had put a tape in the machine, but I was alone in the house. I'd been alone since I arrived, unless someone had been here before me, set this up, and left. But why? And how did it turn on by itself? My hand reached out to turn off the TV, but I stopped. On the screen, the variety show had cut to what looked like a commercial break, but it wasn't a commercial. The video quality changed, became more amateur, home movie style. It showed a dining room. Not just any dining room, my grandmother's dining room, the one 20 feet above me, the yellow wallpaper with tiny flowers, the round oak table, and sitting at that table was my family. My parents, much younger, probably in their 30s. My uncle Mark, who passed away when I was 15. My grandmother, looking exactly as I remembered her from childhood, maybe 20 years ago. And me. I was maybe 10 years old, wearing a Cleveland Indians t-shirt I distinctly remembered owning. This was a home movie. Nothing scary about that. My grandmother had recorded thousands of hours of family gatherings, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was someone else at the table. Sitting between my younger self and my Uncle Mark was another person. A man I'd never seen before, middle-aged, wearing a sweater, smiling at the camera. He was passing the potatoes to my mother. They were all acting like he belonged there, like he was part of the family. But I had absolutely no memory of this person. None. And I remembered that dinner. It was my 10th birthday. I could remember the cake, the presents, the argument my parents had afterward about something trivial. But I could not remember this man. The video continued playing. The man was talking, his lips moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. The audio was too distorted, too fuzzy. 10-year-old me was laughing at something he said. My grandmother was smiling at him with obvious affection. This wasn't someone random. This was someone they knew well, someone I'd apparently known well. But my memory had completely erased him. I stood frozen in front of that television, my mind trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Who was this man? Why couldn't I remember him? The video kept playing, showing more of this dinner I both remembered and didn't remember. Then young me turned to look directly at the camera. My child face filled the screen, and I watched my younger self mouth words. Even with the poor audio quality, I could read my lips. "He's watching us," young me said, pointing toward the camera. Everyone at the table turned to look. The strange man's smile grew wider. Too wide. Inhumanly wide. The tape stopped abruptly. The screen went to static for a moment. That harsh white noise that filled the silence. Then it cut to another scene. Different date, different occasion. Christmas morning based on the decorations. I was maybe 8 years old this time, sitting on the floor surrounded by wrapping paper and presents. My parents were on the couch behind me. And there he was again. The same man sitting in my grandmother's chair watching me open presents. He was in the background of every shot, always watching, always smiling that too wide smile. How had I never noticed him before? How had I forgotten someone who was apparently present at every major family gathering? I finally managed to move, reaching for the VCR to eject the tape. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the button. The machine made a grinding noise, reluctant to release the tape. When it finally ejected, I grabbed it and looked at the label. Written in my grandmother's handwriting was David Birthday and Family Dinners, 1995, 1998. Just a normal home video label. Nothing sinister, nothing that explained what I'd just seen. I looked around the basement den with new eyes. The space that had always felt cozy and safe now felt wrong. Too dark in the corners, too cold. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be. That's when I noticed the shelf next to the television, the one where my grandmother had always kept her videotapes. There were dozens of them, all neatly labeled in her handwriting. Family events spanning decades, all the memories of our lives together, recorded and preserved. I'd always thought it was sweet how she documented everything. Now those tapes looked ominous, like they contained secrets I wasn't supposed to discover. Against every instinct in my body, I grabbed another tape at random. Family Reunion 1992, according to the label. I pushed it into the VCR with trembling hands. The tape played immediately, showing the backyard of this very house during summer. There was the family reunion I remembered, the folding tables loaded with food, kids running through, the sprinkler, adults talking and laughing, and there in the background of nearly every shot was the man, sometimes sitting in a lawn chair, sometimes standing at the edge of the frame, always watching, always present, always forgotten by me. I ejected that tape and grabbed another. Christmas 1989. There he was. David's first day of school 1987. There he was. Summer vacation 1993. There he was. Every single tape I checked, this stranger was present. Not just present, but integrated into my family, into my childhood. Everyone in these videos interacted with him naturally. My parents handed him plates of food. My grandmother hugged him. My uncle joked with him. Young me sat on his lap in one video, reading a book with him. How is it possible to completely forget someone who was apparently a major part of your childhood? The human brain is powerful, capable of suppressing traumatic memories, but this seemed beyond that. This felt deliberately erased, or blocked, or hidden. But by whom and why? I was about to put in another tape when I heard a sound that stopped my heart. Footsteps. Above me, on the first floor. Slow, measured footsteps, walking across the living room, directly above my head. The floorboards creaked in that familiar pattern, the same pattern I'd learned to recognize as a child, the sounds that told me when adults were walking around after I'd been sent to bed. I stood completely still, barely breathing, staring at the ceiling. The footsteps continued. They walked from the living room into the kitchen. I heard the kitchen chair scrape against the linoleum floor. That specific screech I'd heard thousands of times. Someone had just sat down at the kitchen table, in the house where I was supposed to be completely alone. Every rational explanation evaporated from my mind. This wasn't old pipes or settling foundation or my imagination. Someone or something was upstairs. Someone or something had been here the whole time, waiting, watching, just like. The man in the videos had always been watching. I looked back at the television. The last tape was still in the VCR, paused on a frame from my 10th birthday party. The strange man's face filled the screen, that too wide smile frozen in place. And I swear, even though it was a paused image, even though it was impossible, I saw his eyes move. They shifted to look directly at me, not at the camera, at me, standing here, now, in this basement. The footsteps above me started again, slower now, more deliberate, walking toward the basement door. I heard the doorknob turn with that specific click I knew so well. The door opened, light from the first floor spilled down the stairs, and then I heard it, a voice, calling my name, David. It was a man's voice, friendly, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl because I couldn't place it. David, I've been waiting for you to come home. The footsteps started descending the stairs. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The creaking step. I could see the shadow on the wall growing larger as someone came down. My body finally responded to the screaming panic in my brain. I ran, not toward the stairs, that's where he was coming from. There was a second way out of the basement, a bulkhead door that led to the backyard. My grandmother used to use it to bring in firewood. I hadn't checked if it was locked, hadn't even thought about it until this moment. I sprinted across the basement, knocking over a stack of cardboard boxes in my panic. The bulkhead doors were old metal, painted red, secured with a simple latch. Please don't be locked, please don't be locked, please don't be locked. My hands fumbled with the latch. Behind me, I could hear the footsteps reaching the bottom of the stairs. David, don't you remember me? I was always there. I never left. The voice was closer now, coming from the den where I'd just been standing. The latch came free. I pushed against the bulkhead doors with all my strength. They resisted for a terrifying moment. Rusted hinges, years of disuse, then burst open into the night air. I scrambled up and out, my feet slipping on the concrete steps, my hands scraping against the rough metal edges. Cool October air hit my face as I emerged into the backyard. The grass was tall and wet with evening dew. I ran through it without looking back, around the side of the house toward my car in the driveway. My keys were in my pocket. Thank God, thank God. I fumbled them out as I ran, pressed the unlock button, heard the blessed sound of the car chirping. I threw myself into the driver's seat and immediately locked all the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine started, another small miracle. I threw the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway too fast, nearly hitting the mailbox. As I shifted into drive, I made the mistake of looking at the house. Every light I'd turned on was still glowing, making the windows look like yellow eyes, staring at me. And there, standing in the living room window, was a silhouette, a man-shaped shadow perfectly still watching me leave. Even from the distance of the driveway, even through the glare of the window, I could see something pale and round where his face should be. He was smiling, that same too wide smile from the videos. I drove away faster than I've ever driven in my life. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway, surrounded by other cars and light and normalcy. It was almost midnight when I finally pulled over at a rest stop, my whole body shaking with delayed shock. I sat there in the parking lot, engine running, doors locked, trying to process what had happened. The rational part of my brain desperately wanted to explain it away. Stress, grief, being alone in an empty house where someone I loved had died, the power of suggestion, old electronics malfunctioning, my imagination filling in gaps in childhood memories with something sinister. But the rational explanations felt hollow. I knew what I'd seen, I knew what I'd heard. Someone or something had been in that house with me. Someone or something that had always been there, just outside my conscious memory, waiting for me to come back and remember. I called my parents from the rest stop. My dad answered, groggy and confused. David, what's wrong? It's midnight. I tried to explain what had happened, but even as the words came out of my mouth, they sounded insane. A man in old home videos I didn't remember. The TV turning on by itself. Footsteps upstairs. A voice calling my name. Someone watching me from the window. My father listened in silence. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said something that made my blood run even colder than it already was. "David, we need to talk. Your mother and I. There are some things about your childhood we never told you. Some things the doctors said you were better off not remembering." He wouldn't explain over the phone. Said it was too complicated, too sensitive. They'd come to my apartment tomorrow and we'd talk in person. He made me promise not to go back to the house, ever, for any reason. "We'll hire someone to clean it out," he said. "You don't need to go back there." The way he said it, with such firm insistence, told me he knew exactly what I'd experienced. He'd expected it. Maybe he'd even experienced something similar himself. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car at the rest stop until dawn. Doors locked. Lights on, jumping at every car that pulled in. When the sun finally rose, I drove back to Columbus in a daze. My parents came over that evening as promised. What they told me changed everything I thought I knew about my childhood and about that house. There had been someone else in our family, a man named Michael, my grandmother's boyfriend after my grandfather died. He'd been part of our lives for years during my childhood, present at every gathering, every holiday, every important moment. And, according to my parents, I'd loved him, called him Uncle Mike, spent hours with him. He'd taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, been like a second grandfather to me. But Michael had been dangerous. Not obviously, not at first. It was subtle. The way he'd isolate me from other children, the way he'd insist on being alone with me, the inappropriate questions he'd ask. My parents had started noticing things, little red flags that accumulated into serious concern. They'd confronted my grandmother, who'd been defensive at first but eventually agreed something was wrong. They'd told Michael he wasn't welcome around me anymore. He'd left, just vanished from our lives, and I'd been so traumatized by whatever had happened during the time I'd spent alone with him that I'd blocked out all memory of his existence. My parents had taken me to therapists, child psychologists. The consensus was that my mind had protected itself by erasing Michael completely. Not just the bad memories, but all memories of him. It was an extreme response, but not unheard of in cases of childhood trauma. As long as I never encountered anything to trigger those memories, I'd be fine. The doctors had said I might never remember, and that might be for the best. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked them. "Why let me grow up not knowing?" "The therapists advised us not to," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "They said, if your mind had buried it, forcing you to remember could do more harm than good. We thought as long as you never had to see him or think about him again, you'd be okay. We thought we were protecting you. But why were you going to let me go to the house alone?" The betrayal I felt was overwhelming. You knew those videos were there. You knew there was a chance I'd find them. My father's face crumbled. "We didn't think. God help us. We just didn't think. The house had been empty for 2 years. We thought everything had been dealt with. Your grandmother promised us she'd destroyed all the tapes with Michael in them. We thought it was safe. But my grandmother hadn't destroyed them. She'd kept them, hidden them in plain sight among all the other family videos. Maybe she couldn't bear to erase those memories. Maybe she'd genuinely believed Michael was innocent, that my parents had overreacted. Or maybe, and this is what haunts me most, she'd kept them for Michael, left them there for him to find. Because Michael never really left. My parents discovered he'd never moved away from Ohio. He'd stayed in the area all these years, drifting around, working odd jobs, and apparently he'd kept track of us, kept track of the house. When my grandmother died and the house sat empty, no one thought to change the locks. Why would they? It was a quiet suburban neighborhood, but someone with patience, someone with an obsession, could easily have gotten a key, could have been entering the house whenever they wanted, could have been waiting for me to come back. The police investigated. They found evidence someone had been living in the house's basement periodically. Food wrappers, blankets, a sleeping bag. The VCR had been recently used. There were fingerprints. They're still looking for Michael. He disappeared after that night, vanished as completely as he'd vanished from my memory years before. But sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, still watching, still waiting for another chance to remind me that he was always there. My parents sold the house to a developer who tore it down. There's a new construction there now. A modern house with an open floor plan and no basement. Part of me is glad it's gone. That house, those memories, that entire chapter of my life needed to be erased as completely as my mind had tried to erase Michael. But another part of me feels like we lost, like by destroying the house, We admitted he had power over us, over me, that he'd tainted something that should have been innocent and safe. I've been in therapy for months, now working through recovered memories. Some have come back in dreams, in flashes, moments with Michael that my conscious mind had buried. Some of them are innocent, teaching me to tie my shoes, reading me books. Others are darker, though my therapist says I may never fully remember everything, and that's okay. My mind is still protecting me. But here's what I can't shake. That night in the house, when I heard footsteps above me, when I heard my name being called, when I saw that silhouette in the window as I drove away. Was that really Michael? Or was it something else? Because when I think back on those home videos, on that man with the too wide smile, on the way his eyes seemed to follow me even in a paused frame, I can't help but feel like I'd witnessed something beyond just a predator stalking his victim. Something about his presence in those tapes felt wrong on a level deeper than physical threat, like he wasn't just a dangerous man, but something that shouldn't exist at all. My father insists it was Michael. The police agree, the evidence supports it, but I was there. I felt the cold in that basement, saw the impossible programs playing on that television, watched those eyes move in a frozen frame. And late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I sometimes wonder if Michael was ever just a man at all, or if what attached itself to my family, to me, to my grandmother's house, was something older and darker that simply wore a man's face, something that feeds on forgotten memories and erased trauma, something that's still out there waiting in other family homes, other basements, other people's blind spots of memory, where the mind refuses to look. I'll never know for sure. Maybe that's for the best. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some memories should stay buried. But I'll tell you this, I don't go to family reunions anymore. I don't watch old home videos, and I never, ever stay alone in empty houses, especially ones with basements. Because now I know the truth that every child instinctively understands, but adults forget. The scariest monsters aren't strangers. They're the ones who were always there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to remember.